In this uncertain new world order being ushered in by Donald Trump, what place do African nations find themselves in? To discuss the issue, we're joined by Alex Vines, the director of the Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Good morning. It's good to speak with you.
Morning.
I want to start with one of the big takeaways from this past week of diplomacy in Davos, the idea summed up by the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney that we were seeing a rupture in the world order. Is that a vision that rings true from an African perspective?
A bit, but the African focus is on multipolarity. It's about multilateralism. So it's about allocatism, in fact, which is that the US is one of a number of different partners involved on the African continent. And so you see a real uptick of other countries investing in Africa, being involved, the Gulf states in particular, which we can talk about, but also renewed interest from Europe. This year, we'll see the first ever France-Africa summit on African soil in Nairobi. The Italians have a summit also. So it's a mixed picture, but definitely the US is no longer going to engage on security issues, for example, in the way they previously did. And they certainly cut back on humanitarian support and human rights and governance support. This was very much the case last year with the abolition of USAID.
And would you agree with the analysis that Trump's exclusion of sub-Saharan nations from his Board of Peace sort of reflects a broader disregard for those countries?
Well, yes, but I mean, the Board of Peace, really, the people have signed up. If you look at the majority of who are on it, you've kind of mentioned it. They're from Middle East and North Africa, and it's very much about Gaza. So yes, there isn't an African there. That I think reflects the way that the US looks at the world. I would recommend, if your viewers are interested, to read the US National Security Strategy, because it's quite a lengthy document like the one that's just come out on defense. But Africa is reduced to 3 small paragraphs right at the end of that document, which I think reflects the status of Africa in the Make America Great Again vision of the world.
The last time we spoke, you expressed your concern that Trump would attempt to exclude South Africa from the G20 once the U.S. took over the presidency, and he appears to be succeeding in that. South Africa's finance minister confirmed this week that they are on leave from the alliance this year because the U.S. simply isn't going to allow them to attend events. How significant is that?
Well, there is some Trump ideology on the African continent for sure, and the dispute with South Africa is the most pronounced one. So yes, there won't be any visas issued to attend the G20 summit in Florida. South Africa is going to have to work through the African Union, which is also a member of the G20, and get some of its issues and issues that were discussed in South Africa under their presidency highlighted through the African Union, because they have still been invited. But there are other things that the South Africans are still concerned about. The African Growth and Opportunity Act is looking as if it might be renewed for 3 years. It has gone through Congress now. It needs a vote by Senate. But it's unclear whether South Africa will be part of a goer, and that will be impactful on the South African economy if they don't have those preferential advantages of trading with the United States. And as your viewers and you may remember, there's also 30% tariffs on South Africa and a threat of another 10%. If South Africa continues to be more tightly aligned with the BRICS, which it's a member of.
Now, Trump seems to have sort of a particular ire for South Africa and Nigeria, as well as another country that he's threatened over its failure, in his words, to protect Christians. Are there some African nations, though, that he has sort of a more positive relationship with?
Yes, there are more positive relationships on the African continent. There's continuity in Angola, and for example, the United States did commit finally and put money down for the Lobito corridor. So that's the corridor that brings minerals out of Congo through Angola to the Atlantic. So that's an example. And there is more diplomacy by the United States on the continent with a number of different countries. Nigeria, in fact, I think has mediated and convinced the Americans that there may not be that there isn't genocide of Christians in Nigeria. They did frenetic diplomacy in Washington at the end of last year, and the Trump military strikes against so-called jihadist locations inside northern Nigeria at Christmas time, I think, was indicative actually of cooperation between Nigeria and the United States. It wasn't a unilateral United States action.
You mentioned that the relationship sort of between various African nations and other global powers are sort of a la carte, is being sidelined by Trump and the United States, likely to lead some African nations to become even closer to other U.S. rivals like China and Russia. I know you mentioned Middle Eastern countries as well. Can you talk about more about those relationships?
Oh, look, it was very obvious that there will be in fact, the U.S. would be encouraging Gulf states and the Middle East to be more involved on Africa. And in the new defense strategy, it's kind of clear that that's the direction of travel, that the U.S. doesn't see this. This is not Western Hemisphere Africa. But there is, for example, good, clear evidence of Europe, of African countries wanting to engage more deeply again with Europe, for example. So this is, I think, something that the Trump administration doesn't fully recognize, that globally they will be encouraging by their behavior in Washington with their policies for countries to look at how to kind of manage risk with an unpredictable partner like the US and shore up and renew new partnerships. And I mean, Turkey is also holding a Africa summit in Libya this year and is also increasingly active on the continent. I could give you a long list of countries that are becoming more engaged. And so while the US is becoming less engaged, others are becoming more engaged.
Lots of relationships developing and to keep an eye on. Alex Vines, thank you again so much for your analysis this morning. That's Alex Vines, the director of the Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations.